Religion in ancient Rome was not something people could step in and out of, the way modern religion often is today. It was not a matter of personal conviction. It was the air people breathed, the background noise of their lives, the rhythm of the calendar, and the explanation for nearly every natural and social phenomenon. To us, their beliefs seem strange, even absurd, but to them, it was the framework of reality. The world was populated with gods, spirits, and divine forces. Lightning was not a natural discharge of electricity, but a message from Jupiter. The growth of crops was not explained by soil chemistry or irrigation, but by the favor of Ceres. Victory in war depended not only on strategy, but on whether the correct sacrifices were made to Mars. The gods were everywhere and nowhere. What is striking is that Romans did not even have a word for religion in the modern sense. They used the term religio, but this meant obligation, duty, or the proper performance of rituals. Religion to them was not about belief, it was about action. A Roman who made the correct sacrifice, prayed the correct words, and honored the correct festivals was considered pious, regardless of what he thought privately. Orthopraxy, right action, was what mattered, not orthodoxy, right belief. This meant that skepticism could exist beneath the surface without openly conflicting with the system, so long as one performed the expected duties. But make no mistake, disbelief as we think of it, full denial of the gods, was rare and dangerous. To reject the gods was to reject the Roman community itself. The gods were not just divine beings, but part of the state's foundation. To dishonor them was to weaken Rome. This is why accusations of atheism were often political rather than philosophical. A person labeled an atheist was seen not only as impious, but as a threat to the social fabric. Yet skepticism was present. Educated elites, influenced by Greek philosophy, often questioned the gods. Epicureans, for example, taught that the gods existed but lived in perfect peace, unconcerned with human affairs. For them, fear of divine punishment was irrational. This was as close to irreligion as Roman thought usually went. Epicurus himself had argued centuries earlier that thunder and lightning were natural, not divine. Romans who followed this school could avoid the terror of omens and portents. But even they stopped short of outright denial. They said the gods were real, but irrelevant. In a society structured around ritual, that subtle distinction was enough to create suspicion. Cicero, the statesman and philosopher, presents a fascinating case. In his dialogues, he often sets different philosophical schools against each other. On the nature of the gods places Stoics, Epicureans, and skeptics in debate. The skeptic character, Cotta, dismantles every argument, exposing contradictions in divine logic. Yet, Cicero himself ends by siding with the Stoics, who upheld a rational, ordered universe governed by divine reason. Was this his true view, or a political necessity? We cannot know. But what we can say is that Cicero recognized how fragile belief could be when exposed to reasoned questioning. His dialogues reveal the cracks beneath Rome's confident rituals. What is often forgotten is that accusations of atheism were first directed not at skeptics or philosophers, but at Christians. From the Roman perspective, Christians refused to participate in the civic religion. They would not sacrifice to the emperor, would not honor the state gods, and withdrew from the shared rituals that bound society together. To Romans, this was practical atheism. Belief in one invisible God was irrelevant compared to the visible refusal to perform duties. To them, Christians were atheists because they abandoned the system of obligations that defined Roman life. The irony is sharp. Christianity, which today is a religion, was once condemned as atheism. The refusal to join in Rome's gods looked identical to unbelief. This tells us something crucial, that atheism is not always about denying gods in theory. Sometimes it is about stepping outside the rituals that keep religion alive. The story of Roman religion also shows how fragile the idea of gods really is. If belief were strong on its own, Rome would not have needed constant rituals to reinforce it. But the endless sacrifices, auguries, and ceremonies suggest an insecurity. A god who truly governed the world would not need priests to examine the entrails of chickens to know his will. Yet, Rome depended on such practices. When Hannibal threatened the city, when crops failed, when plagues struck, more rituals were performed, more sacrifices demanded. The gods never gave clear answers, but the rituals gave the illusion of control. This was their true function, to provide order in a chaotic world. Still, cracks widened as Rome expanded. Conquests brought foreign gods into the pantheon. Isis from Egypt, Mithras from Persia, Cybele from Anatolia. Each found a place in Rome. This tolerance might look enlightened, but in reality, it showed how shallow belief was. If gods could be added so easily, were they ever truly sacred? Romans treated religion like a marketplace. If a foreign god promised good fortune, Rome adopted it. This was not faith, it was transaction. The philosopher Lucretius went further than most. In his poem, On the Nature of Things, he argued that everything is made of atoms moving in the void. The gods, if they exist, have no concern with us. He described religion as a source of fear and cruelty, pointing to the legend of Agamemnon sacrificing his daughter Iphigenia to please the gods. To Lucretius, religion led people to commit horrors they would otherwise reject. He offered a vision of a world governed by natural laws, free from divine terror. Though his ideas survived only on the margins, they anticipate modern materialism. In a deeply religious society, his voice was a rare spark of reason. Yet, even in Rome, people noticed the silence of the gods. Omens often failed, prophecies contradicted each other, victories were won despite broken rituals, and disasters struck despite prayers. The historian Livy recorded how during the Second Punic War, priests scrambled to perform rituals after every defeat, desperate to explain why the gods seemed absent. The failure of religion was obvious, yet people clung to it because abandoning it would mean questioning the very foundations of society. This is the paradox. Rome tolerated nearly every cult and philosophy, but never true unbelief. A man could believe the gods were distant, or that they were metaphors, or that they came from foreign lands. But he could not say there were no gods at all. That step was too far, because it threatened the state itself. And yet, history proves otherwise. The empire endured countless broken rituals, countless failures of the gods, countless unanswered prayers. Rome eventually adopted Christianity, not because the old gods failed any less, but because people were ready to replace one illusion with another. The gods of Olympus were silent, so a new god was declared to speak louder. The pattern was the same: ritual, obedience, control. What makes Rome worth studying is not just its rituals, but the hints of skepticism beneath them. The Epicureans, the skeptics in Cicero's dialogues, Lucretius with his atoms, all these voices remind us that unbelief is not modern. Even in the heart of Rome, where gods filled every corner, some people saw through it. They may not have called themselves atheists. They may have hidden their doubts under ritual. But the seeds of questioning were always there. In the end, Rome shows us how religion adapts, how it survives by changing form, and how unbelief is always present, even when buried. The Romans could not fully escape their gods, but some glimpsed a world without them. And that glimpse, fragile as it was, is the beginning of what we now call atheism. The most striking thing about Roman religion is how little belief itself mattered. A man could doubt the gods in private, but if he walked in the procession, offered the sacrifice, and uttered the proper formula, then all was well. This makes Roman religion less about truth than about performance. In fact, Roman priests were often politicians, and politicians were often priests. Julius Caesar, long before he became dictator, was elected Pontifex Maximus, the chief priest of Rome. Did anyone truly think Caesar was chosen for his devotion to the gods? It was politics dressed up as piety. The ritual system worked like theater. Sacrifices had to be performed exactly. If the priest stumbled on a word, the whole ritual was void and had to be repeated. If the animal showed a flaw, it was rejected. Precision mattered more than sincerity. To modern minds, this is telling. If gods truly existed and cared about human devotion, would they be so easily fooled by a slip of the tongue? Or does this show that the rituals were never for the gods at all, but for the people who believed they were keeping the world in balance? The state needed religion to function, but individuals often saw through it. The satirist Juvenal mocked those who trembled at omens. Tacitus, writing about foreign cults, exposed how superstition was used to control crowds. Even emperors played both sides. Augustus filled Rome with temples, restored rituals, and claimed to be favored by Apollo. Yet he also banned excessive displays of mourning for the dead, recognizing how easily grief was manipulated by priests. The emperors understood religion was useful theater, not divine truth. But Rome's tolerance was limited. Refusal to participate was dangerous. Philosophers who pushed too far could be punished. The satirist Lucian, writing in Greek, mocked the gods as hypocritical, lustful, and corrupt. His wit survives, but in Rome itself, such irreverence could have been fatal. For a Roman, unbelief was not just a private thought, it was treason. If you refused to honor the gods, you risked the wrath of your neighbors more than the wrath of Jupiter. The real danger was social exclusion, not divine punishment. This is why Christians became targets. To a Roman, the Christian refusal to sacrifice looked like sabotage. Romans didn't care if Christians believed in one god or 100. What mattered was that they broke the contract between citizens and the divine order. The refusal was seen as selfish, as putting the community at risk. Romans thought disasters might strike because a handful of Christians refused to join the rituals. And so, paradoxically, Christians were called atheists, not because they lacked gods, but because they denied the civic gods. This label shows how relative the word atheism really is. To Romans, anyone who rejected their rituals was an atheist, even if they were fiercely religious by another standard. In this sense, Roman religion reveals how shallow gods really are. If a god depends on rituals to survive, then the god is no more than the ritual itself. Remove the sacrifice, and the god disappears. This is exactly what happened when Christianity spread. Temples were abandoned, sacrifices ceased, and suddenly, the old gods were powerless. No thunderbolt struck the Christians for their refusal. No divine armies came to defend Jupiter. The silence of the gods was deafening. It exposed that their existence had always been tied to human action. Philosophers had sensed this long before. The Epicureans argued that religion was born of fear of death, fear of the unknown, fear of natural forces. Lucretius explained thunder and earthquakes through atoms and void, stripping the gods of their role. He said religion makes people cruel because fear leads them to violence. He pointed to human sacrifice as the clearest example. People kill in the name of gods who never answer. To him, liberation came from knowledge of nature, not from piety. And yet, even he stopped short of denying the existence of gods altogether. Why? Because in Rome, that leap was almost unthinkable. Society was not ready for it. The rituals bound everyone together, and rejecting them meant exile from the community. Better to redefine the gods than to abolish them. This shows how deeply social pressure protects religion, even when evidence against it is overwhelming. But cracks were always present. By the late Empire, writers like Ammianus Marcellinus noted how omens failed again and again. Soldiers and generals lost faith in auguries when victories and defeats happened, regardless of sacrifices. Common people began to follow mystery cults, which promised personal salvation rather than civic duty. When religion fails to deliver, people do not abandon belief, they replace it. This is the cycle. The gods of one age become the myths of the next. Christianity succeeded because it shifted the focus from ritual to belief. Rome had cared about what you did, not what you thought. Christianity reversed this. It demanded faith, demanded interior conviction. To Romans, this was baffling. They could not understand why Christians would rather die than offer a token sacrifice. But this insistence on belief made Christianity powerful. It made religion personal, something that could survive without temples or sacrifices. This shift also meant that Rome's label of atheism was turned on its head. The Christians once accused of denying the gods would themselves become the accusers, branding pagans and skeptics as atheists. The meaning of the word flipped, but the pattern of exclusion remained. What Rome teaches us is that religion has never been about truth. It has always been about function. The gods survived only as long as people performed the rituals. Once those rituals ended, the gods vanished. Belief was secondary. What mattered was control, order, and identity. And when a new religion offered those same things with more emotional force, the old gods were discarded like worn-out costumes. The so-called atheists of Rome, Epicureans, skeptics, and Christians labeled as such, were not enemies of truth. They were simply people who stepped outside the rituals. And by doing so, they revealed the emptiness of the system. A God who disappears when people stop sacrificing was never a God at all. When we compare Roman skepticism to modern unbelief, the difference is clear. Today, atheism is often framed as a positive stance, the belief that no gods exist, supported by science and reason. In Rome, unbelief was mostly negative, a refusal to participate, a rejection of certain rituals, a suspicion of superstition. Almost no one stood up to say, "The gods do not exist." Instead, they questioned whether the gods cared, whether they intervened, whether they deserved the endless sacrifices. This shows how revolutionary the modern concept of atheism really is. It is not merely the absence of ritual, it is the rejection of the entire framework. Rome never fully reached that step, but it prepared the ground by revealing the cracks. At the heart of Roman religion was fear of angering the gods, fear of omitting the smallest detail in a ritual, fear that the harvest would fail or the army be defeated if sacrifices were not made. This fear was a powerful tool. Priests and politicians could always claim a disaster was caused by ritual negligence. If lightning struck a temple, they said someone had offended Jupiter. If a plague spread, they said the gods were angry. The explanations were always convenient, never testable, and never accountable. Fear kept the system alive even when it failed repeatedly. Death was the greatest source of fear. Romans were deeply uneasy about the afterlife. Unlike Christians, they did not believe in eternal heaven or hell. The underworld was shadowy, uncertain, and bleak. Epicureans offered comfort by teaching that death was nothing, that consciousness ends when the body ends. But this view never became dominant. Instead, cults promising salvation spread across the empire. The cult of Isis promised eternal life. Mithraism promised reward for the righteous. Christianity promised resurrection. The common thread was the exploitation of death's mystery. When natural explanations were absent, religion filled the gap with fear and promises. This mechanism has not changed. The fragility of Roman religion became most visible during crises. When Rome suffered military defeats, priests performed more sacrifices, augurs read more omens, and processions filled the streets. Yet victories came not from rituals, but from strategy, leadership, and resources. The rituals did nothing to change outcomes, but they gave the illusion of control. This is why religion survived. It provided comfort, not solutions. In moments of chaos, comfort was enough. But the collapse of the old religion revealed its weakness. As Christianity grew, people abandoned the civic gods. Temples fell silent, sacrifices ceased, and nothing happened. The sky did not fall, the crops still grew. The empire continued until it fell for reasons entirely human: economic decay, military pressure, political corruption. The gods played no part. Their silence in the face of Rome's decline proved what skeptics had always suspected: that they were projections, not powers. Even Roman writers hinted at this. Seneca, though a Stoic, admitted that the gods people worshipped were shaped by human hands and fears. He said people feared the gods because they built them in their own image, giving them human flaws and desires. This is why Jupiter was imagined as jealous, why Venus was lustful, why Mars was violent. The gods were mirrors of human weakness, not sources of wisdom. It was an early recognition of a truth, that gods are human inventions, shaped by culture, preserved by ritual, and abandoned when they no longer serve. The transition from paganism to Christianity is one of history's greatest ironies. The Romans called Christians atheists because they rejected the civic gods. Yet within a few centuries, Christians would call pagans atheists for rejecting their God. The accusation flipped, but the logic remained. Each side claimed their God was truth, and the other's gods were false. This shows that atheism is not just a label for unbelief. It is a weapon used by believers to discredit outsiders. In Rome, it was used against Christians. Later, Christians used it against skeptics. The word changes target, but its purpose is always exclusion. What makes Rome so revealing is how it shows the emptiness of divine authority. The gods of the Republic vanished because people stopped performing their rituals. The gods of Christianity survived because people shifted their rituals and beliefs. In both cases, the divine did nothing. It was humans all along, humans maintaining or abandoning, humans building temples or tearing them down, humans shaping rituals, humans enforcing belief. The gods themselves were silent. This silence is the most important lesson. When rituals ceased, when temples closed, when sacrifices ended, the gods disappeared without resistance. They had no power to defend themselves. They had no voice. They were as fragile as the humans who invented them. This is why studying Roman religion is so valuable. It shows in clear detail that gods depend entirely on human belief, not the other way around. When we look back at ancient Rome, we see not just a vanished religion, but a pattern that repeats throughout history. Gods rise when people perform their rituals, and they fall silent when those rituals stop. They are not eternal beings, but social constructs. The Roman pantheon seemed invincible, yet it disappeared almost overnight once people turned away. The temples of Jupiter and Mars now stand in ruins, visited only by tourists. Their power was never real. It was always borrowed from human hands. What is fascinating is how closely this resembles the way belief functions today. People assume their gods are absolute, but they are propped up by communities, rituals, and constant reinforcement. Take away the repetition, the ceremonies, the holidays, and the daily reminders, and belief weakens. Rome proves this. The gods lasted only as long as people kept feeding them with sacrifices and prayers. When the supply ended, so did the gods. The Roman experience also shows us how flexible belief can be. Romans absorbed foreign gods without hesitation, mixing them into their pantheon as if divine beings were commodities. This tells us something fundamental. If gods can be imported, swapped, or merged, they cannot be universal truths. They are inventions tailored to cultural needs. When Isis or Mithras offered something Roman religion lacked, people welcomed them. And when Christianity promised eternal salvation, it became the dominant force. Religion is not a discovery of eternal truth. It is an adaptation to human fears and desires. Roman skeptics, though limited by their time, were already reaching toward this realization. Lucretius showed that natural explanations free us from divine terror. Cicero revealed how weak religious arguments look when placed under scrutiny. Even Roman historians admitted that rituals often failed, that the gods gave contradictory signs, that disasters struck despite endless sacrifices. The seeds of doubt were always there. Rome never fully embraced atheism as we understand it, but it laid the groundwork by showing how belief collapses under examination. There is also a lesson in how Christians were branded atheists. It reveals how fragile religious categories are. To Romans, rejecting Jupiter was atheism, even if you believed in another god. To Christians, rejecting Christ was atheism, even if you believed in countless others. The label was never about truth, it was about loyalty. And this is still the case today. Believers use atheist not as a description, but as an accusation, a way of marking someone as an outsider. Rome shows us the origins of this tactic. The deeper point is that humans have always created gods to manage uncertainty. Fear of storms, fear of death, fear of chaos. All of these birthed rituals and deities. But as knowledge expands, the gods retreat. What was once divine becomes natural. Thunder was once Jupiter's voice. Now it is electricity. Plagues were once the wrath of Apollo. Now they are germs. Each step forward exposes how unnecessary the gods were all along. Rome's collapse as a religious system is only one chapter in this larger story. If we strip away the rituals, what remains is human need. Religion in Rome was never about the gods, it was about Romans. It gave them a sense of order, identity, and reassurance. But those needs can be met in other ways, through philosophy, through science, through community without superstition. Rome shows that once belief loses its usefulness, it fades. And when it fades, the gods it sustained vanish without a trace. The ruins of the Roman temples stand as silent proof. Once they were filled with incense, chants, and sacrifices. Now they are stones under the open sky. The gods that once ruled there are forgotten, their names little more than echoes in books. And yet, the human impulse to invent new gods continues. Christianity replaced Jupiter, Islam arose in another land, and countless other religions filled the gap. The cycle continues, but the lesson remains. Gods exist only because humans keep them alive. In the end, the story of religion, belief, and unbelief in ancient Rome is the story of humanity itself. It is the story of fear turned into ritual, of power dressed up as piety, of doubt whispered beneath the surface, and of gods that vanished when people stopped believing in them. Rome proves that belief is fragile, that rituals cannot sustain truth, and that behind every god, there is only humanity looking back at itself.